There's traffic outside. Uh, like the really obnoxious motorbike kind of traffic, and I really hope it doesn't get too distracting in this video, but apologies in advance if that's the case. Once again, the lighting is not as great as I'd like it to be, but, what are you gonna do? So, today, I'm talking about Wonder Woman, and also a little bit of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, because that movie's still relatively recent, and I don't think I've discussed my thoughts on it anywhere since it came out, except maybe like comments on other people's videos and whatnot. And there actually are a lot of similarities between the two movies that I will get to over the course of this video. I should be able to. This is a non spoiler video. I won't be spoiling either of those movies outside of just sort of vague claims. And so if you haven't seen either one, then this is a good. This is fine. But, I'll get into the similarities as I talk about Wonder Woman because Wonder Woman is going to be the main focus of the video. And I'm only about an hour out of having seen Wonder Woman just now, so yeah. I tried to get as many notes down without spoilers as I could to really talk about this movie because my god, guys, you have no idea how bizarre it is to come out of a DCEU movie and not just like it, but really like it. Like, okay, so I was gonna save this toward the end, but I might as well get it out of the way now. Of the two movies, I liked Guardians Volume 2 more than Wonder Woman, but that's like a thin line, people. Like, if I'm placing them in my Marvel Cinematic Universe rankings, I did a video ranking how I felt about each of those movies. Um, Guardians Volume 2 is between Doctor Strange and Iron Man 3, and Wonder Woman is between Volume 2 and Doctor Strange. So, I mean, they're neck and neck, man. It's just, I don't know. Volume 2 got more of an emotional response out of me. Like, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is the only superhero film I've ever seen to make me cry full on actual tears. Wonder Woman didn't quite get there. Maybe it would have gotten me there had I not accidentally gotten myself spoiled for a plot point at the end. But I don't know. I kind of doubt it. But that's first similarity out of the way. But I mean, just focusing on Wonder Woman for the moment, you know it's a really good movie when the absolute worst thing about it is just that there's too much slow motion in the action scenes. And that was the one and only thing consistently taking me out of the movie was the slow mo. Like, I'll get to the action in general and what I feel like is the best action sequence. And the use of slow mo in that scene is alright. Still a little overboard, but really every action sequence in this movie, I don't think there's a single one that doesn't have some kind of slow mo, and it's real unnecessary and it's real distracting. And that is where my list of negatives ends for this movie. Where, I don't know, this is just a really, really solid film. I guess just getting to the main attraction and what everyone seems to be most divided on, even those who like this movie, is Gal Gadot. Like, going into this film, I'd heard most people say that she was serviceable, that she was passable for the role, that she wasn't bad, and that was about it. One or two people said that they were really impressed with her performance. I'm about in the middle, I think. I think because I hadn't seen Gal Gadot in anything except for BVS, and I still haven't. So I left that movie questioning whether or not she was a good actress because she has nothing to do in that film. And going into this movie, I was like priming myself, like, okay, be prepared to spend time like gauging Gal Gadot's performance. And then we reach this moment about like halfway through the movie where I stop and I realize like, oh wow, like you haven't even felt the need to think about it like once over the entire half of the film. I guess she's just got you engaged. Like I went into the movie expecting to see and judge Gal Gadot, and I just saw Wonder Woman. Like that sounds like a real trite thing to say, but she's Wonder Woman. She's not an actress playing Wonder Woman. She's just, I see the character. I'm never looking at the actress in that film. Outside of maybe the very first scene where she's not a child or a young teenager and it's actually Godot in the role, and I'm like, okay, what is she doing? After that point, the whole film is just I see Wonder Woman. And so kudos to her. She and Chris Pine have amazing chemistry. Like their relationship is real good. Like I'm not someone who dislikes a lot of the romances in comic book movies, but as far as just chemistry between actors go, I think it's either them or Robert Downey Jr. and Gwyneth Paltrow that are just the best. Like, I just feel it whenever they're on screen. And it's not necessarily a sexual thing, although they do talk about sex in a pretty mature way. But their relation, I don't know, I buy it. With the two of them, they're perfect together. And Steve Trevor is a great character. Chris Pine plays him great. When when the very first initial Twitter reactions came out for this movie, and a lot of them were talking about the directing and Chris Pine's performance and Steve Trevor. It made me real concerned that like Steve was going to be a scene stealer, like he was going to, like it was going to feel like his movie, or that like he was the most dynamic part of the movie. Now this is Gal Gadot's movie, and she carries it big time. And all this talk about like my initial doubt for her performance and that stuff, it just solidifies what I think was obvious and what everyone's been saying since Batman v Superman came out, which is that this movie, excluding the bookends, the first and last scenes which are set in the present, this movie could have and should have come out before Batman v Superman, because a lot of people came out of Batman v Superman calling Wonder Woman the best part, and I just couldn't see where they were coming from, because she's a nothing character in that film. She adds absolutely nothing to the story or the plot or the themes or anything in that movie. And that movie gives Gal Gadot nothing to work with. So she doesn't even provide like a great performance. Release this movie first, and suddenly I'm able to go into Batman v Superman having been informed by the events of this film and her character arc in this film, which is a really nice arc. And although you can tell that there is still a difference between where she is at the end of this film and where she was in Batman v Superman, you get it. And I don't know, like, I can't retroactively give Batman v Superman points because I understand her better, but she still doesn't need to be in that movie and she's not adding anything. But now, if I'd seen this first, then I would not be calling her a nothing character in BVS, because there is build. There are things in that movie that are lines of dialogue building on where she is at the end of this. And for a whole year, I just had to take those as, oh, they don't mean anything. Or even if they do mean something later, they mean nothing in this film. And I don't understand what the thought process was of releasing BVS before this, except for maybe it had been 3 years since Man of Steel and they didn't want people to forget about that movie. I don't know. But, yeah, compared to the other DCEU movies, it's not even a contest. Like, if the three, if Man of Steel is a movie that I used to hate but now think is mostly passable, and BVS and Suicide Squad are at the very bottom, beneath rock bottom, beneath the bottom of the barrel, then Wonder Woman is like not even close. She's at the very top of a much larger barrel, is what this movie is. And what kind of impressed me is that that is true, while at the same time this movie is building on the few solid motifs that I found to be present throughout Man of Steel and BVS and Suicide Squad, which is like morality and how it relates to gods, and that's something that I expect to be picked up on in Justice League. I'm still not confident that Justice League is going to be a good movie, even with this movie coming out, and even with Joss Whedon working on Justice League. I think it is likely going to be a better movie than BVS, but I don't hold out hope for it being a movie that I will like as a whole film. But I don't know, there's a real solid idea that I think is connecting all of these movies, and that makes Wonder Woman feel like it's very much in that same world, beyond, like, because aesthetically it's clearly in the same world. Just like the Marvel Cinematic Universe has a consistent sort of look to it, the DCEU also has its own style that I think this movie sort of rides the line with. But beyond that aesthetic stuff, like just the color palette and the camera quality, I guess you could say, the main thing linking it is like that idea of mankind's relationship to the gods and how that affects good and evil, and I don't know, and it's I guess I'm just impressed that this movie feels so much like part of the DCEU, despite the main quality defining the DCEU up to this point being that they're bad movies, or that I think they're bad movies. It's just real weird. Like, it doesn't feel out of place in any way other than quality, which I felt like for a while we would have to get a movie that was radically different in style and presentation of its point if we were ever going to get a movie that was decent, and this proved that wrong, and I'm glad. And I guess talking about those themes, the funniest thing about my experience with this movie is that it talks a lot about things that I wanted The Lie of the Land to talk about. Uh, in my most recent video, which I just recorded yesterday, actually, a Doctor Who review, I talked about how that episode skirted around a lot of socially relevant ideas that I think need to be addressed head on now more than ever, about humankind and how cynical our existence is, and how everyone is, in one way or another, to blame for all of the bad things that happen in the world just by existing, and that humanity is kind of. I don't know, like, we're kind of bunked. And this movie is talking about a lot of those things, but that episode and this movie ultimately come down on an optimistic note. Like, what actually happens in the ending of this film isn't actually any sadder than say the ending of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. They are similar endings in terms of what happens, but the note, like the feel of how Guardians of the Galaxy 2 decides to end feels more somber than the way Wonder Woman decides to end. Wonder Woman ends on an incredibly hopeful note, and because of that, I almost want to call it the happiest ending that a superhero film has had in a long time. Uh, I feel like we've gotten a lot of movies lately, superhero movies, that have bittersweet endings or downright tragic endings. Like we've had Logan, we've had Civil War, Doctor Strange to an extent, I think is a pretty downer of an ending. Uh, like the last ending of a superhero movie that I can think of that was like 100% a happy conclusion was X-Men Apocalypse, and that movie did not earn that ending at all. And before that, Deadpool, and so I don't know. It feels kind of good that for the first time in about a year, maybe more, we've had one of these movies just end on a real hopeful note, and that it's coming from the DC movies, which at this point I think we've all trained ourselves to think of as the less hopeful ones, like the movies where even Superman isn't allowed to actually be a hopeful character. That his last appearance ended in a very sad, complete dirge of an ending. But I don't know. Here comes Wonder Woman, and it's real hopeful and it's inspiring, even though it does. It's not ignoring the way in which all people have good and bad in them, and it ends with the bad part of people and the bad part of society never really go away, and they're with you forever. And it comes down on optimism, but it's not sugarcoating anything. It doesn't chicken out like I accuse The Lie of the Land of doing. It doesn't bring up how it doesn't bring up the faults of humanity that got us to a place like where we are in 2017 or where we were in World War I and say, "Oh no, it's it those things don't matter. Humankind is let's not talk about it." But it really acknowledges all of the ways in which we are our own worst enemy, and it doesn't have a simple answer to how we fix that or if we can fix that. And it is exactly the kind of message that I think we need to hear right about now, about how you can try to do something and you can try to do nothing. And either one, honestly, opens the possibility for corruption and you not necessarily being a good person, and what do you do about it? Who knows? I don't know, it's a real brave. I feel like today it's a real brave stance to take in like a major superhero movie. And I don't know, like I really like that a lot. But I was talking about the action scenes, and I should probably get back to that because another thing that this has in common with Volume 2 is that they neither of them really feel like action movies to me. Like, I know that that's what they are, and they do, by the end, they do devolve into very chaotic, action heavy climaxes, but that's just sort of par for the course. Like, when you've got a villain who's the god of war and a villain who's a planet, you want those movies to end with big, loud final action sequences. The I found the climax of Volume 2 more impressive than the climax of Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman sort of falls into that trap of its best action sequence is the the middle action sequence, and that's that's the No Man's Land sequence. That's what's in all the trailers, and they were right to put it in all the trailers because that is the scene that everyone is going to come out of this movie talking about. The one that everyone's talking about already. And, because, I don't want to ruin it, but that's the first moment where you get Wonder Woman. And, and it's just, it's a real amazing sequence. Like, it's not even necessarily amazingly choreographed or amazingly shot. Like, there are a lot of great shots in that sequence, but it's not like transcendent on a technical level, but just where it's placed in the movie, and it's it's iconic. I think that that is an iconic sequence, and down the line, like years from now, people are going to be talking about the No Man's Land sequence in this film the same way that we talk about, like, the climax of Avengers or the train fight in Spider-Man 2. I think that scene is going to be up there with those two action sequences in a lot of people's books. And like I said, that's the one place where the slow-mo really worked. It's it's just such a great sequence. That's like worth the price of admission for that fight scene alone. But like I was saying, these movies don't feel like action movies to me as much because that is the one big show-stopping sequence in Wonder Woman. And outside of that, you've got the big action climax, and there's maybe two other small action sequences over the course of the movie. And like a lot of it, and a lot of Guardians Volume 2 also is just characters sitting down and talking, and it's a lot of focusing on theme and focusing on the emotions of the characters. And I really admire both of those movies for doing that. And it's not even like Civil War, where it feels like that's also a very dialogue emotion movie, but it's sort of compensating by blowing up the action scenes that it does have to huge proportions. No, here you have the climax of both films, which is, you know, your big blockbuster climax, and outside of that, there's the No Man's Land scene, and that is the big action beat, and the rest of the movie is a lot of relationships and talking punctuated by action sometimes. And I really liked it. And, let's see what else. I really like the supporting characters in Wonder Woman. Uh, Guardians Volume 2 doesn't even really have supporting characters. It has, like, the main core cast, all of whom I like, and the villain, and a couple of minor villains. I don't know. It's difficult to call anyone in Guardians 2 a supporting character, but Wonder Woman definitely has those, and they're really fun. They're like the Howling Commandos in Captain America: The First Avenger, except these guys leave a way better, way more of an impression. Uh, Not to the point that I fully remember their names, but like each of them have things about them that make them real fun. They're diverse. They feel like real people, and one of them, we do something similar with one of them to what we did in the reboot of Magnificent Seven, and the No Man's Land action sequence has a whole Magnificent Seven vibe to it, and what that movie did that this one also does is that they have a character who has PTSD. He has a shell shock that keeps him from being useful in an action sequence. And we don't do the generic thing that Magnificent Seven did, where we have him redeem himself for that by just sort of getting over it later. That's where I figured we were going, and that never happens. Like, you could argue some people would say he needed a redemption moment, but I like that we have a character with this affliction in this setting who's just allowed to have it and who doesn't have to, like, there doesn't have to be a moment just because that's what every movie does where, oh, he gets over his trauma. Like, no, that doesn't always happen. And, uh, both of these movies, talking about the climax, like I said, I think the climax of Volume 2 is more fun. It's, more impactful. Like, most, yeah. Just as action goes, I think that Wonder Woman's climax could use some work. But what I like about both of them is that they avoid notable problems that a lot of superhero movies have, even Logan, which is that the climax doesn't involve characters fighting people with the same powers. And you could argue that Volume 2 gets off easier because it's a team movie, and team movies usually avoid that problem. But Wonder Woman, especially, I feel like, is the first solo superhero film in a long time where the villain wasn't just the evil version of the main character. Like, the most recent thing that comes to mind in terms of the hero and the villain having radically different power sets is Iron Man 3. And I want more of these movies to be less like, oh, our hero uses hand to hand, so let's make the villain a hand to hand guy. Our hero has a suit, so let's give our villain the same suit. And that's not what we're going to get with Spider-Man Homecoming. I struggle to see how that's what we could get with Thor Ragnarok. I really hope that that keeps being a thing with these movies. Because just sitting there in the theater, the main thing that I took away from the climax was like, oh, this is fun. Wonder Woman's fighting someone whose powers, outside of the fact that they are also strong and fast, are not at all similar to her own, and that's fun. And I never thought I'd say this, and this is like the last note that I really have. I never thought I'd say this, but this movie brings me around on the theme music. Like, I hated Wonder Woman's theme in BVS. I hated it when it played in all the trailers. Maybe it's just that it's never quite as loud in this film as it is in trailers or as it was in BVS, but it feels a lot more obnoxious here. And when an action scene starts, I'm like, I'm waiting for it. Like, okay, now would be a time to come on, give it to me, and then it does, and I'm like, ah, like it's fun. Like, I don't know. It feels like the last half hour of me talking has just gone by in a blur, but this was a real good movie. Like, I hope it looks like it's on track to make a lot of money. I hope it makes more money than BVS. I want this to make the most money of any DCEU film. I hope even once Justice League comes out, it makes more money than Justice League. More female superhero films, more Wonder Woman films, more of this character, more just films that are willing to take demographic risks. And I don't know, just like, I'm glad that this movie made me a liar. I came out of Suicide Squad having paid money for that film, deciding that I did not want to pay money for any more DCEU movies ever again, and I'm glad that I changed my mind for this one. I'm glad that the critical reception made me change my mind, because this was a real fun ride. And I guess to just tie back in Guardians Volume 2, because again, I don't know when the next time is that I will be able to talk about this movie. I didn't do this as a scripted video because, I don't know, it felt right. It feels right now that to do my raw thoughts in scripted videos. I may still eventually one day do either Guardians Volume 2 or Wonder Woman as scripted videos, but I don't know. And, don't worry though, I've got some scripted stuff coming. I haven't given up on that. Hellboy 2 is coming, and some other stuff's coming, but Guardians Volume 2 was a real. It was a real, like, impactful movie to me, and I felt like it was paced perfectly. I felt like every character got the right amount to do. And it's difficult to put into words exactly, like, what it is that tips it over Wonder Woman for me, but Wonder Woman just has. I don't know, because it's not like. Wonder Woman doesn't have anything holding it back, but I feel like. I don't know, Guardians Volume 2 just is more suited to me, maybe, I don't know. But Wonder Woman is still extremely suited to me. Like, again, I'm ranking this over a majority of the Marvel movies. And, who knows, that may change over time for both of these films, but I hope it doesn't. I hope with subsequent viewings I like them both more and more. And, I don't know, go see both of these movies. That it's they're good.